Ronnie is a professional drone pilot, and his job sends him to some strange places. On his current mission, he was sent to the snowy mountains of Tibet to shoot some background footage. But while he was there, he found something he never expected to ever lay his eyes on. When he flew his drone beyond the mountain's forbidden zone, he captured some giant glass domes hidden in two mountain craters. He knew that they were probably hidden for a reason, but he never could have guessed what was inside. Ronnie was nearly done with his work for the day when he found the domes. He just had one last shot to capture, requiring him to fly his drone high over the mountains. He knew that filming was not allowed in the area, so he'd have to be quick. And soon he'd find out just why he wasn't allowed to be filming. Ronnie positioned his drone high above the mountains, and he couldn't believe what he saw come across his computer screen when he did so. Two giant glass domes came into view. They were positioned right in the crater of the mountains below. Ronnie knew that his drone's battery was low, so he'd have to be quick if he wanted to take a glimpse inside. Ronnie took a chance and flew his drone closer to the domes below. He couldn't believe his eyes when he saw what was going on inside. He had to tell somebody about this. But what was going on inside the domes? And why were they completely hidden from society in the middle of a snowy mountain range? Ronnie has worked as a professional drone pilot for over 10 years, and he had traveled around the world for his job. He had experience filming footage for action movies, documentaries, and sporting events. And he was very proud of his work, but he knew that finding these domes was more important than anything he had done before. Ronnie was used to going to some extreme locations to shoot footage, but it was his first time going to the mountains of Tibet. But he had traveled there alone. He was told to get footage of mountain peaks and snow to be used in a documentary about wildlife and freezing temperatures. However, this is not exactly an easy task. Although his drone was top-notch, Ronnie was still unsure about accepting the job. A lot of work is required in a very difficult environment. The drone gets to incredible heights, and the cold gets below freezing at those altitudes. Is it worth taking these shots? There was only one way to find out. The only way to get to the filming area is on foot. Climbing the snowy Tibetan mountains was not Ronnie's idea of fun, and he was almost ready to refuse the job. The job would require him to be isolated in the snowy mountains for days, and he wouldn't get paid until after the job was done. It was almost enough to make him turn down the job and head back home. But he just couldn't do that. The company was ready to offer him so much money for these shots that he simply couldn't say no. He figured that he would be fine as long as he found a good guide up the mountain. After all, it was just a job. Getting the perfect shot has always been difficult, but this is a little more extreme than what he's used to. The first thing Ronnie had to do is find a guide who knows the area well and can take him up the mountain on foot. However, this is not an easy task. He had to find someone local, and people around here were not friendly to outsiders. It took him 2 days before he was able to get someone to talk to him. Ronnie was 2 full days into his trip already, and he had to rush up and down the mountain with footage ready to send in order to deliver the photos on time. If he doesn't send the footage within a week, the documentary will be delayed, which means a pay cut for Ronnie. He was finally able to get in touch with the locals, so Ronnie hired 2 Sherpas to guide him up the mountain. The Sherpa people were nomadic and knew the mountainsides well. Even with their knowledge, the trip was difficult and cold. Ronnie started wondering if his equipment would still work in these conditions. The strong wind was freezing and didn't give up for a day and a half, but with a bit of luck, Ronnie and his guide made it to their filming location. The weather was starting to settle, and Ronnie was starting to get hopeful again. If he could get these shots quickly, he could be back down the mountain soon, but things were quickly changing. Ronnie got to work preparing the drone. He spoke with the guide and received some bad news. They knew the route around here very well because it was usually packed with people. There were many flags along the route, indicators of human life and civilization. This was exactly what Ronnie didn't want. Given that he was working for a nature documentary, the mountains needed to be as free from human life as possible. It should look natural and clean. A flag or even a person in the shot would look bad, and the company might not accept the footage. So luckily, Ronnie's guide had an idea that would change his whole trip. Parts of the mountain were off limits to Sherpa people and other outsiders. This meant that those parts of the mountain were largely untouched and natural, perfect for documentaries. However, there was a slight issue that could mean serious problems ahead. Given that this part of the mountain was off limits, planes and helicopters were also forbidden to fly over it. This also included drones, which were not yet specified in any legislation because they were so new. Technically, it didn't break the law, but it was still risky. Despite the risks, Ronnie intended to go ahead with their plan. He had already done too much to go back now, especially since he had spent so much time and money just to come here. He had no intention of leaving without achieving his mission, and it was his stubbornness that led to his discovery. Once they reached the edge of the restricted area, Ronnie set up his drone and lifted it into the air. His guides were mesmerized by his drone, watching it move around the sky. Ronnie talked to them and showed them how it worked. He had done this countless times before, so he didn't expect anything strange to happen this time. Ready to send up the drone, Ronnie piloted it in the direction of a completely isolated mountaintop. The drone was out of sight in 15 minutes, but Ronnie could still see where it was going through his cameras. It was time to start getting footage of the isolated area. Ronnie took the drone to the top of the mountain and set it up in various positions. He successfully captured some difficult shots after he started recording. He got close-ups of steep hillsides and falling snow. What he saw on camera was incredible, and what he was about to see would be even more so. The weather cooperated, allowing Ronnie to get his most difficult shots. He then did some wide angles around the mountain, capturing various rock formations and snow mounds. He swooped down with his drone, shooting shot after shot of snow, sky, and the sun. But this wasn't the only thing he caught. The mountain goats lived all the way out there, and the amazing footage of wildlife he got was really moving. Unfortunately, those would be some of the last shots he got. The drone battery was dying. It was time to wrap things up and bring back the drone. Ronnie could only get one more shot. The final shot was destined to be epic. Ronnie wanted a sweeping view of the mountains to show how big they really are, and to show their beauty as a whole. He turned the drone around and took aim while looking carefully through the camera. That's when he saw it and his jaw dropped. Although he only expected to see mountain peaks and clouds, Ronnie was given a completely different sight. So this is what he did not expect to see there. At first he thought he was hallucinating and seeing things in the high altitude, but that couldn't be. So what did Ronnie see? It looked like two huge glass domes along the crater of the mountain. But what are these glass domes doing there? What was their purpose? And more importantly, who put them here? Ronnie was unable to answer these questions, but perhaps his guide could. After all, they knew the area and most of what happened there. After being stunned for almost a minute, Ronnie came to his senses and called for his guide. He asked them to describe what he was seeing on the monitor, but they didn't know. They were as clueless as Ronnie, but he didn't plan on being ignorant for long. Ronnie was curious and wanted to take a closer look with the drone. Unfortunately, he got an alarm that the battery was losing power quickly. But he didn't get his drone back to him now. He'd never see it again. But the dome was right there. What choice did he make? Growing more reluctant, Ronnie flew the drone towards him. Flying as fast as possible, the drone barely made it back to Ronnie before completely powering down. He was happy to have his drone back, but this didn't solve the mystery. There was definitely something strange there, and he wanted to see it. Ronnie wasted no time packing his equipment. He intended to go hiking to that spot. It's still a long way off, but he was more than determined. Despite his courage and curiosity, there was something that stopped him, and it wasn't the distance. So what was stopping Ronnie, and will he get over it? It wasn't the weather or the distance that stopped Ronnie. It was his guide. They argued that this was forbidden territory and that no one should enter it. They didn't want to break the law and get into trouble. But Ronnie wasn't afraid of the law, and his curiosity was too strong to return without knowing what he had seen. If he had to do this himself, he would. After a long talk and some seriously persuasive arguments, one of the guides agreed to go with him. He was also intrigued, especially after seeing the drone footage. The other guide wanted nothing to do with it and headed down the mountain to the campsite. He promised not to tell anyone about their mission, but he could have no part in it. This left Ronnie with one guide and determination. Is that enough to make it to the site and back in one piece? They quickly crossed the border into the forbidden territory. There were no gates or fences to keep people out. No trespassing. Punishable by law. Read a single sign on the trail. That was enough to keep the locals out, but not Ronnie. He had the spirit and drive to do great things, and he was convinced that this was great. Ronnie and his guide journeyed through the treacherous forbidden zone, climbing tirelessly toward their goal. After hours of struggle, they reached a small dome nestled on a mountainside and discovered a glass window overlooking an inexplicable field of dirt. Their curiosity intensified when they found a locked door and a non-functional face scanner. Resourcefully, Ronnie powered the scanner using his drone's battery and attempted to use it, despite the high security. To their amazement, the door unlocked, revealing a leading to a massive room under the dome. Inside, they found supplies, temperature controls, and signs of long-term habitation, but no inhabitants. A sign identified the place as the President's Doomsday Bunker, confirming its purpose as a secret shelter for elites during disasters. Realizing the grave consequences of their discovery, Ronnie and his guide hastily exited the bunker, ensuring they left no trace. They erased any evidence, including drone footage, and vowed never to reveal the secret. So the experience left Ronnie with a sobering understanding of the risks of unchecked curiosity. Some secrets, he realized, are best left undisturbed,